Okay, so let's get going. Welcome to this free Friday webinar. This is 30 minutes where we will share some really interesting knowledge and then open up for questions afterwards. And after 30 minutes, we will leave you to your afternoon. This webinar is automatically captioned and you can use the CC button in Zoom. It is recorded and the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel after the session. If you would like to ask questions to today's speaker, please use the Q&A function. The chat is monitored for technical questions, and we will also share some links in the chat throughout the presentation, and also the free smart guides that we create for every Friday webinar will also be posted in the chat by the end of the session. So today we are very happy to introduce again to many of you who have been here before. You have heard Malin speak before. So our brilliant senior UX designer and accessibility expert Malin Hammarberg, who will talk to us about the best things in life that are free. This is actually a sequel after the first one where she was talking about testing websites. And now we will have sequel about how to test mobile apps. So please, Malin, welcome.
Hi, and welcome. I work, as Susanna said, at Funka Foundation, and I'm certified professional in web accessibility, but I've done a lot of accessibility testing when it comes to mobile applications. And at Funka Foundation, we have worked a lot with mobile application throughout. We do audits, we do research projects where we involve end users and test and try different things, and we do training. So if you, after this webinar, still feel that you need more information, do not hesitate to contact us. When it comes to testing accessibility, we talked about this during the webinar where I talked about testing in websites as well. We have three different types of tests, so to say. We have the automated tests. They are much smaller here in mobile applications, so I will go through them today. Then we have manual checks where we can build in add those testing methods that we can't really reach when we do the automated tests. And then we have user testing where we test with end users. And all of these are important. Do not miss any of these parts. Remember to test with user. It's a vital thing. And each and every time I've tested with end users, I learned something new. And I hope to share some of that today. We talked about last time also that automated testing tools are imperfect because they tend to give us both false positives and false negatives. They can't test all the criteria that requirements we have on mobile application when it comes to accessibility. So they need to be complemented. False negatives was when the automated tool miss an error that's actually there, and I will show you an example about this. And false positives were when we get errors that we get bugs that aren't really bugs. So we add a lot of time and thought to something that isn't really an accessibility issue. So when it comes to automated testing in mobile application, there's actually not that much that can be tested. They are very limited to just some checks. So what the automated tools test is the touch target size, which actually is one of those AAA criteria in WCAG. But they are very important when it comes to mobile phones. And that's why both in iOS automated test and Android, the touch target is tested. And I recommend to make sure that this is solved. Resizable text, that the text has the possibility to resize, so it isn't fixed. So when a user has increased the font size, that the text actually can increase. So it's a dynamic font size. Color contrast, so it checks if there are any issues with color contrast. I've seen several of those missed checks on color contrast where the automated test can't really find all the errors. Accessibility items and accessibility labels and items labels. They're named a bit differently in iOS and Android. It's tested, so you can see if the visual name is kind of similar to the programmatical name or the name you need to say if you control with the voice. And then missing accessibility information is tested in iOS. So this isn't that many tests, but they are really good. I think learning how to do these automatic tests help you guys a lot. So in Android, it's quite simple. On your smartphone, you download the accessibility scanner from Google App Store. And then you just start it and follow the instructions. On iOS, on the other hand, you need to have a Mac computer. And on that Mac computer, you install the free program Xcode from App Store. And in Xcode, there's a program called Accessibility Inspector. And with that program, you can test your app. So you do not need to have the code or anything, but you need to install kind of the coding program that the developers do, that's called Xcode, on your Mac. So we'll go through this. So let's start with iOS Accessibility Inspector in Xcode. To start with, you need a Mac, as I said. Then you download Xcode from App Store and install it. Connect your phone physically with a cable to your Mac, your iPhone to your Mac. And then you set up the same Apple ID as you have on your iPhone on your in Xcode. And then it's just to start. So here, when you start Xcode, sorry, I zoom in a bit. You go to Settings, and on Settings, sorry, no, it didn't work. Okay. On Settings, you just add your Apple ID, and then you can open Accessibility Inspector, and now you can connect to your phone. So I connected to Malin's iPhone here. And then you can run an audit. It's the button you get up, choose what app, and run an audit. And you will get whatever issues you find, and you can follow around. You can click on the kind of little eye thingy to see where the errors are located on your app. And you can see, find some errors. Here is an example where it hasn't found that it has not enough contrast on this button here. This is not enough contrast, the white text on the pink button. Element has no description. It has found 5 of those, but it hasn't found the contrast. However, in Accessibility Inspector, on the first tab here, on the second tab is where we run audits. On the first tab, you can select to go through every object and see. So now the marker is on this object in the footer here, and then it says it has no label, no value, no traits, no nothing. So of course it will get a warning and something needs to be fixed there. But you can also open, in this view, you can also open a color contrast checker. So then you can mark whatever you want to test. If you want to test this one, you can test and see what the colors are for that object. And it's 2.9, so it failed, but it wasn't one of the checks that turned up in the audit. That's why it's so important that you still figure out what you need, what you think is bad accessibility, and test that at an extra step, because some misses might flow through otherwise.
Malin, can I just disturb you? Sorry, but we get a question about if this is possible to do without having access to the code. And I think
this is, I have no code here. I just took a random app and tested it. So the kind of secret is that Accessibility Inspector is hidden inside Xcode. I don't do anything with Xcode. I just set it up so I can test my phone with Accessibility Inspector. That's a separate program that opens up. And with that, you can test your app. You do not need the code. You don't need access to it. You can see the errors, and you can do reports and send to your developers wherever they are and say, fix this, but you do not need to have access to the code or understand the code to use this program. There are so many good things in this one. I can't cover them all today. If you want us to do one other, we will talk more about the Accessibility Inspector inside iOS. I'm happy to do that during the autumn. So let us know. Comment on the video or in YouTube or something afterwards. To show the color contrast analyzer, you can click when you have the Accessibility Inspector open, the Option Command C, and then it opens up, or you can choose it in the top menu and show color contrast calculator, and then you get this one up. That's really easy to check the color contrast because you can open how the app looks and you can click around with the color picker and check different things without taking screenshots. So it's a good feature. The Android Accessibility Scanner is an app. You can install it on your mobile phone when you test on Android. Then go to Accessibility and Accessibility Scanner and open it and follow the instructions. And then you just open the app and test whatever you want to test. The thing that happens is that you will get one of these floating action buttons when you have the Accessibility Scanner running on top of your app. And when you click it, you have several possibilities. I usually take snapshots because I think it's easy just to get the errors per view instead of recording kind of a flow. But you can also record a flow and get like errors on several views if you want that. And then you get a report with different things. And if you click one of these, you can see what's wrong. So I clicked on the button here, and here we actually got that it has bad contrast. And you get a warning, and you get some kind of instruction how to fix things. So these were very limited. I recommend to do them because they can reveal good things about labels and color contrast if they work. But manual testing is always essential to complement these two automated tools. And if we start with the simple checks, it's when we test devices, orientation, and appearance. So I always recommend test your app on phones and tablet. Don't lock it to one of the devices because there are users that might need a tablet for different reasons. And it's so sad to lock them out from your app. So it doesn't need to be beautiful, but if they can use it on tablet, you really help a lot of users. So make sure it works on the phone and tablet is my recommendation. Make sure it works in portrait and landscape because some users might have the device mounted, for instance, horizontally, and then it needs to work, the app needs to work. So make sure that you can, that your app works in both portrait and landscape. And then light and dark mode. It's a common setting. Some user groups love dark mode. We know it's popular among users with low vision. It's popular among users with migraines and epilepsy. So I would really recommend that you test that your app works in light and dark mode and check that the contrasts are good in both versions. And that everything turns into dark mode and that it follows the user preferences. So if the user has turned on dark mode, your app should preferably be in a dark mode if it has dark mode done. So those are the simple tests. Then we have the adjustable font size. On Android, depending on the model, because Androids are so different depending on who have built the phone itself, you can either go to accessibility and find font size under there in settings, or in settings you can go to, in some versions, you can go to personalization and then find font and display size. In some other models, you go to settings, display, and then you find font size in there. Usually you can search for font size inside the settings and find them easily. Okay, so in Android, the thing you should do is drag the slider to the end position, which is approximately 200%, not really, but almost 200%. So it needs to work with the end position. So make the text as large as you can. On iOS, the accessibility, you can find it in the settings under accessibility, display, and text sites. In iOS, you need to turn this on the switch larger text. And after you turned on that, you get more steps on your slider. And then you choose the position 9. That is approximately 200%. So when you've done this, what are you supposed to check? Well, firstly, if the text gets enlarged, and here is how it looks on Android, this app, and how it looks on iOS. And what we can see is that the text didn't really get enlarged, except the text inside the button. So what you test also is to check that the text is still visible. I would say that it's not visible here in iOS, so this is a fail. If it's hidden underneath or outside of screen, if it's under or top of other objects, so it's hard to read the text, or if the text is truncated. So all this you need to check after you have increased the font size. And if any of this happens, it should be fixed. Then we have the Android Accessibility Suite. In some Android models or some phone makers with Android on, you don't have the accessibility installed from the beginning. You need to go into App Store and install it yourself to make sure you get all the assistive technology features. So if you want to test your Android, check that you have the Android Accessibility Suite installed. If we start with tests with assistive technology, I recommend testing with the built-in screen readers in Android. It's called TalkBack. You can start it under Settings, Accessibility, and TalkBack. You can add a shortcut, which I always use. It's highly recommended. It's easy to turn on and turn off if you have that. You can turn it on with Google Assistant. And when you have started TalkBack, there's a TalkBack menu where you can, for instance, navigate between headings. So to reach that one, you swipe down and then to right, like an L to open up. I think you can also swipe the other way like this, but like an L to open this menu on the screen, and then you can select how you want to navigate, try to navigate with the screen reader. On iOS, you open it through the settings, accessibility, and then voiceover. And there's also possible to set a shortcut here. It's highly recommended. Then you can also start it with Siri, of course. And if you want to get into the accessibility menu or this menu in voiceover, what you do is that you kind of pretend that you have a dial. So you kind of rotate your fingers on the screen like this. And then it will open up, and to check between the things you can do in the menu, you keep turning that dial, kind of. And then you can find the settings, for instance, navigate between headings, which is a good thing to test, both in Android and iOS, that you can navigate between the headings and between the different sections on the view in the app. I have a great tip to turn on the screen reader captions. It usually helps when we do reports. So in iOS, it's called Caption Panel, and you can see it underneath there, where it's on this tab, what it writes out what it says. So it says selected tab 3 or 4 in this case. And on Android, it's called Display Speech Output, and I also have it here. And now it's talking about this button. Unfortunately, the button isn't really named really good, so it readapts your bookings, retrieve bookings button. I think this is a good tip because it's easy to show what's gone wrong when you do a screenshot and send it to the developers so they can see how it's experienced inside VoiceOver. It's also much easier than trying to write down what it says. So what do you test? Well, of course, that you can reach everything. There are two different methods. So one is that the user swipes to get to the next object when it reads with screen reader. This is an easy test. Just swipe and make sure that it reads everything and the objects turn up in a logical manner. But I've also done a lot of user testing, and there's another method used as well, where the user navigates by just moving his finger across the screen and try to hear everything and kind of paint a mental picture how the view looks like. If the objects aren't long enough then on the screen, it's easy that an object is missed. So I would recommend using both try to swipe through and make sure they come in a logical order, but also check if you can reach everything with dragging your finger down, even if you turn off the screen curtain. And you can do that both in Android and iOS, where you can turn the screen black and use the screen reader. Try and see if you can touch every object. It's both methods are used, so it's good if it works with both, or it should work with both methods. Voice control. My time is coming on very fast here. So voice control. Best thing you can test with voice control is that the labels are named correctly. So download Voice Access from Google Play. Find it in accessibility in Voice Access. Use the floating button to start, and you might need to download some voice, some language support. When the 5 dots are there, it indicates that Voice Access is listening or not listening. On iOS, you can find it in Accessibility Voice Control, set up voice control, and then a microphone indicates if voice control is listening or not listening. So in iOS, I love it because when you say show names, you get up the names and you can see if they are similar to the names that you see visually. And if they aren't, then there's one of those bugs that we have found. And you can also say show numbers, and then you can see if they come in a logical order, the things. We have a hidden object up here. And you can do a check on that. And there's the last thing you can say, show grid. This is useful if you can't reach objects in any other manner because they are not labeled or they are not, and test if they work this way. In Android, the show names is called show labels instead. Check that the visual label match the voice control names and make sure that the user can navigate and use all elements using the voice. And then my last tip, connect an external keyboard. I have one of those small little USB keyboards that Bluetooth keyboards. I connect via Bluetooth to my phone. And then you can also use a cord to connect it to your phone. And then you just tab around and see that you can reach everything. On iOS, you need to activate keyboard access sometimes to make it work, but otherwise it's just go like you do on the website. It's easy and fun. Is the item in order to logical order? Can you see what item is highlighted? Are items highlighted only if you can perform an action with them, so you don't highlight things that shouldn't be interactive? Is the contrast enough on the highlights on the active object? Does anything unexpected happens when you move around with the tab key? And remember, none of these tests that I talked about can replace real user testing. So, any questions?
Thank you, Malin. We do have quite a few questions and just 5 minutes. So, is there a way to run Accessibility Inspector or a similar checker on a Windows device without requiring Xcode, or is there an alternative available?
I haven't found anyone. So if you need to test iOS, you need a Mac. That's for the automatic tests. But most of the things You kind of can test with manual methods. If we look at the label names, you can test, as I showed, with a voice control. You can test contrast by taking screenshots and testing on your computer with color contrast analyzer or something. So that works.
Okay, and another one is, thank you. Do you recommend to have access to the code or to do the testing like you showed today without having access to the code?
I'm not a developer, but I can test and check and understand what's wrong and won't work for a user. But I recommend, my largest recommend is still to involve end users to make sure that you test with them. So you, no matter if you test, I also usually kind of try to get the developers to test themselves as well. So I'm more like a peer reviewer when I work together with developers to make sure that it's accessible. But you don't need access to code, is my point. You can do it without.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Another one on testing. Is it possible to carry out online user testing of mobile apps remotely?
I've done that during the pandemic via Teams. It works. You kind of need to be inventive sometimes, because it's good to see the screen and what the user does, and sometimes it's hard to follow, especially if the user uses screen reader to understand what happens. So it might take some time to set it up so that all can work, both the person on the other end, but also that you see what happens and understand what happens. So it can work, but it might need some kind of setup or a lot of time before you can start doing the tests, so you both are feeling okay.
And next, thank you. Is there a certification on mobile apps? You mentioned certification in the beginning.
I know that not a certification, but I think IAAP is looking into having a friend thing, right, Susanna, with the VAS. You can add extra something, maybe.
Extra something. Well, at least a training. So the idea is to create a training, and then let's see how we can make it like a diploma or a certificate or something. But there is no, I don't know. But from the IAAP standpoint, we do not today have a certification on mobile apps, but we are developing a training on mobile apps. So that's kind of the first start. Yes. How can I test success criterion 1 for 10 reflow on iOS and Android?
Reflow, it's the enlarged screen, right? You can test it either by trying on different device sizes, so a small iPhone SE and a larger iPhone, but you can also try it by increasing the display size in settings, which you can do both in Android and iOS. And for all the tests I couldn't cover today, app.org is a good web page to check out. They have really good help with some of the tests. So app.org, you can try, if I didn't cover all the tests, because there's like 70, so I didn't have time.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Stefan can put that in the chat. Yes,
Right.
or somebody else did. Thank you. So I think we need to wrap up because it's 1 minute left. Thank you very much, Malin. As always, very useful and a lot of content. I think there may be a need for another one of those. It seems to be quite popular. Now we will go on Easter holiday break, and then we are, all of us in the team, we are in the Czech Republic for the IAAP EU event in Brno on the 23rd, 24th of April. So that week we are kind of in the air, going back home, so we can't do a webinar that Friday. And then it's the 2nd of May, which is kind of a bridge holiday day. So the next one is on the 9th of May. So it's already a month before we have the next one, where we talk about accessible surveys. And it's Malin again and our dear colleague Sara Kjellstrand, who is a research strategist and a specialist in cognitive accessibility. And they will present the results of a research project and other results of other work we have done when it comes to accessibility in user surveys. We have also more information, I think, in the chat from our smart guides and all of that as usual. So thank you very much for attending today. Thanks again, Malin, and have a very nice Friday, all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye, nice to see you.